13 states abolished slavery
And
by the
here's
time of
the- and here's
constitutional
the other
ratification.
thing. I mean,
it's not like
you-
every white person was supportive. In fact, we had abolitionists at the time of the founding.
Exactly.
So why would you say one group?
Well, I mean, it's not. You don't have to have every white person.
No, in fact, the
something,
majority of white people found slavery to be reprehensible.
I don't know that if we would have pulled segregation.
No, we did actually
in the 50s, we would have found that.
Let's start with slavery. 9 out of 13 states abolished slavery by the time of constitutional ratification.
Yeah, then why did the South?
And they always start in the 50s,
Like, how is America racist?
All right. Are you familiar at all with the concept of structural racism?
Yeah, it's a myth.
No, it's not.
So tell me why it's true.
Okay, so
not outcomes. Tell me why it's true.
So the textbook that you hearken back to in the 1950s, right? I found one of those in Virginia. It was in publication from five. Yep. And so when we think about like how do you design curriculum that's historically accurate that doesn't talk about oppression? That doesn't talk about one group being oppressed over the other, right? And so when you look at that Virginia textbook, I certainly don't argue that that's what we're looking at heading back towards. But my guess is if you were to try to write a curriculum that covers, slavery in the U.S. or the, Holocaust or whatever, and not, give the narrative that this group did this horrible thing to the other group, you're going to have to rely on some pretty...
But it wasn't groups, though. That's incorrect. Not every white person was a slave owner.
Well, that doesn't matter, though, because,
9 out of 13 states abolished slavery by the time of constitutional
and here's the other
ratification.
thing. I mean,
it's not like every white person was supportive. In fact, we had abolitionists at the time of the founding.
Exactly.
So why would you say one group?
Well, I mean, it's not. You don't have to have every white person.
No, in fact, the majority of white people found slavery to be reprehensible at the founding.
I don't know.
Here's the thing. How could you argue that technology rapidly increases, the nation as a whole, and then on the other hand, use textbooks dating back to 1950 to support your current argument of racism in the country? All I'm saying is we're at the point now, 2024. You went back to 1950. I'm going to your point. I'm not even arguing what I think. I'm going to your point. You started this argument at 1950. We're in 2024. Within the last 20 years, we've seen an evolution of technology that has revolutionized how we even view the world. Yet when it comes to history, we go back to the 1950s. That's one point. The second point I have is when you're referring to racism or you're referring to America's, dark history, as you so call it, and you use that argument to argue systemic racism in our country, when you do that, you're kind of implying that white people as a whole today are racist, which is kind of strange to me because you are a white woman. So you're implying that your race is just inherently racist, which I obviously don't agree with. I do not think white people are inherently racist. I don't agree with that. But this is what you're arguing right now. Let's do that. You use slavery as an example. Majority of white people did not own slaves. Majority of states, like he said, abolished it. And if you look at the pure raw numbers, majority of African Americans today were born in America. They weren't brought here in America. So and I'm not saying this to be like, racism doesn't exist. We all know it exists. We all know it exists. Everyone, like, if you say it doesn't exist, then you just don't live in the world. But when you use these type of arguments to support your claims, you're not really being fair. You're not being objective. You're kind of nitpicking historical facts, kind of. And I'm just not a fan of that. But let's continue.
Know that if we would have pulled segregation
we did, actually,
in the 50s, we would have found that.
Let's start with slavery. 9 out of 13 states abolished slavery by the time of constitutional ratification.
Yeah, then why did the South secede?
Well, they seceded post-cotton gin for economic reasons. We went to war.
And they always start in the 50s. Like, when you use this argument, I was born in the 2000s. So when you refer back to the 50s in an argument about racism today, to me or to my generation, I'm like, were my grandparents even born in the 50s? They were probably born in the 50s. You're like, well, that's not that long ago, but it is a long time ago. Why do y'all always start in the 50s? Maybe it's because you're referring to like the roots were planted in the 50s. Okay, but if you're referring to the roots of America, why not go further back than the 50s? Go to when America was founded. I don't know the exact year America was founded. I'm not a history major in college. 17. I really don't know. But go all the way back and then build up, and then I'm like, okay, I can see where you're coming from. But you always start in the 50s, and when you do that, to me it shows the last example that you have of racism was the 50s. And that's what I get from your argument. Maybe it's not what we're trying to communicate, but that's what I get when I hear, oh, well, in the 50s this happened. Why not go to the 90s or the 2010s? It's always the 50s or the 60s.
Over it, though. To say that
Well, you guys, the South declared war because they expected Lincoln to ban slavery.
And he ended up doing it.
Well, not for a long time. You know why? Because he wanted the fight to be about national unity, which is a good way to, I think, come wrapping around, right? National unity. So like, the first few years of the Civil War, he did not expressly say this war is about ending slavery.
He got to it.
And he later got
Cooper
to that
Union address,
because the South was more passionate and the North needed passion,
I know, but
right?
let's go. I mean, but you said something I want to focus on, though. One group doing something to the other. Like, that's just not true, right? It would be a small group of white people that exploited incorrectly a group of black people.
I think the crowds that would show up for the lynchings, according to research that I've read, numbered in like 5,000. And they would mail, they would take pieces.
Why was slavery being abolished?
Pieces of like these people's bodies.
And it's kind of scary. And I'm not trying to attack this teacher at all, because what she's saying, it obviously would have some truth to it. But it's just kind of scary how she's a history teacher in college. And the reason I'm saying that's kind of scary is because if you're a college history teacher, that means you have a PhD in some specific category of world or American history. I don't know. You have some PhD level. That means you did at least 3 to 4 years of research in this category. And the reason I bring that up is because if you did that, you would know that today, like right now, there are caste systems of people in different countries of similar races, meaning that it's one race and they're oppressing the same race as them because they're a little bit darker, or they were just born to a different family. You know this. You know this is happening today because you have a PhD in this category. And the reason I say that it's kind of scary is because you know this information, and deep down you know slavery itself is not a specific race thing, and you know that it did not start in America, but it did end first in America. You know all this is happening. You know this is true, but yet you're ignoring it. You're ignoring it. And that's what makes this scary. You know all this is happening. You know there's a caste system in different parts of the world where kids are being oppressed today, right now, working 20 hours a day, in mines, mining gold or diamonds. You know this is happening, building castles over their dictator. You know this is happening. That's slavery. But it conveniently passes your mind when you bring up this discussion. It's so convenient. It's so convenient. And you can argue maybe it's not related to this argument, but it is related, because you're going to argue that slavery is race specific. Wouldn't you bring this up that completely contradicts you or completely brings a different perspective? But you just ignore it. But anyways, let's finish this video out.
I'm not supporting that. That's a
but like that is not a small. That's not a small group of people. That's not an isolated event.
But, I mean, in certain states it was widespread.
Systemic problem, right?
9 states abolished it. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the original draft of the Declaration to King George, admonishing him for bringing slavery. The first ever anti-slavery convention was in Philadelphia, chaired by Benjamin Franklin in 1775. Yeah. Thomas Jefferson got rid of the importation of new slaves in 1807. Guess what? Yeah. None of that stuff's taught in our schools right now.
Yeah, a lot. And when they say things aren't taught in schools, and they say, well, why isn't this taught? Why isn't that taught? For one, remember the purpose of school. When you're young in school, like I'm talking before you get to high school, a teacher's job is not to teach you the complete nuances of every category. For one, that's not even possible. You're only in every single class for maybe an hour a day. I'm talking about a specific like history class, science class, maybe an hour a day. And you're young. You're below the age of 14. They can't even teach you the complex things in history. So that's not their job. Their job is to introduce you to new topics. When you get to college level and a master's level, that's when you learn all the complete nuances of history. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because when you use the argument, well, this isn't taught in school, or schools manipulate lessons to be racist or to hide racism. Schools don't even have the time for one to teach students all the things involved, nor are the students capable to understand all the nuances until they get to a certain grade level or a certain age. But she, as a professor with a PhD, you know these certain things. You know this stuff is happening, but you ignore it. And you know you didn't learn this stuff until you got your master's program or a PhD program, or maybe you did your own research when you were in high school or when you were an adult. But you want to teach it to kids, and you're arguing to teach it to kids. Anyways, let's end this video here. If you have any suggestions, I'm gonna get to you. It was like Jojo. I'm out.